Sir, the containment field is offline. Kael'thas didn't move from his command station chair, though every neural pathway in his body screamed to. 17 years commanding Trade Station Kepler-7. And he'd never heard those words strung together in that particular tone. Terror. That's what he was hearing in Vexthul's voice. Pure, crystalline terror from his most senior technical officer. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Clarify, Kael'thas said, because falling apart was not in the protocols, and protocols were all he had left. The primary containment field collapsed 43 seconds ago. Backup systems initiated, but Vexthul's voice cracked. Actually cracked. Sir, the backup systems aren't engaging. Motion sensors in Detention Block 7 aren't registering anything. The security doors are sealed, but I can't confirm they're actually sealed. I'm getting no sensor data at all from that corridor. Kael'thas's mandibles clenched. The level 9s. All 6 of them, sir. The Valraxian cubs, they're... A pause that lasted 3 centuries. We don't know where they are. The command center dissolved into organized chaos. Not the useful kind. The kind where everyone was following protocol perfectly while everything fell apart anyway. Alerts cascading across Kael'thas's display. Red. All red. Containment, offline. Backup containment, offline. Motion sensors, no response. Thermal imaging, corrupted. Door locks, status unknown. 6 Valraxian cubs. Apex predators with pack-hunting instincts that had leveled research stations. Intelligent enough to coordinate kills across 3-kilometer killing zones. Violent enough to destroy the Zenithian settlement on Kepler-12 in a single night. And now loose on his station. Emergency Protocol 17. Kael'thas commanded, his voice steady even as the implications stacked on top of each other like collapsing stars. Full station lockdown. Notify all personnel in detention sectors. Mandatory evacuation corridors to the upper docks. And get me lethal authorization from the Council. We're deploying plasma barriers and... Commander? Zara's voice cut through the chaos. The Zenithian station manager always spoke too quietly, like she was permanently amused by something nobody else understood. You might want to check the maintenance corridor before you authorize anything drastic. The maintenance corridor has nothing to do with this, Kael'thas snapped. The detention block is sealed. The cubs can't. Motion sensor just activated, Zara continued, unimpressed by his panic. Someone's moving through maintenance section Delta, 1 humanoid signature, walking, not running. Kael'thas pulled up the feed. There, casual as if she were taking an evening stroll. Emma Johnson, the human night shift security guard who'd been assigned to station maintenance 3 rotation cycles ago. Walking toward the detention block instead of toward evacuation. His comms activated before he could issue new orders. Hey, so I'm getting some mixed signals. Here. Emma's voice came through, conversational and irritatingly calm. Alarms going crazy, everyone screaming about evacuation. But I'm also hearing something that sounds an awful lot like scared cubs coming from detention. Let me guess. The containment field finally went full stupid, because that always ends well. Johnson, evacuate immediately, Kael'thas ordered. Those are level 9 predators. Lethal threat classification. Yeah, I read the briefing packet. Emma didn't sound concerned. She sounded like she was discussing someone else's paperwork problem. Question, though. When exactly did a level 9 rating become based on they're scary instead of they've actually killed people? Because I'm looking at your incident log, And the only time these cubs were involved in anything was when your security team spooked them during the initial capture. They were already scared. Johnson, also, those cubs are crying. You hear that? The sound came through her comms, soft, high-pitched vocalizations that Kyle Thoss's threat assessment system had classified as pre-attack hunting calls. Except now that Emma was talking about them being scared, he could hear it. They weren't hunting calls. They sounded like a terrified pack separated from its mother. Johnson, I'm ordering you to evacuate. That's not a suggestion. Copy that, Commander. Also copying the part where protocol says security personnel are responsible for maintaining station integrity. The cubs are scared. Scared things make stupid choices. Stupid choices cause problems. I can prevent problems. Emma's voice shifted. Still calm, still casual, but with an edge that suggested she wasn't actually requesting permission. So, I'm going to prevent a problem. You're going to not deploy plasma or neurotoxin or whatever other panic button option you're about to press, and nobody has to die tonight, except maybe my sleep schedule. Kyle Thoss watched the monitor as Emma walked deeper into Maintenance Section Delta. The motion sensor tracked her progress toward Detention Block 7. Sir, Vexthul breathed. She's walking toward the cubs. I'm aware, Kyle Thoss said quietly, watching a human security guard move calmly toward 6 Level 9 predators that were absolutely, definitely going to kill her. Zara made a small humming sound that might have been a laugh. She has no idea what she's doing, Kyle Thoss muttered. No, Zara agreed softly. She probably does. Emma's voice came through comms again, just before she reached the detention block door. Also, Commander, somebody should check why the Cubs' environmental systems crashed, because I'm betting they didn't escape because they suddenly got violent. I'm betting they escaped because they were uncomfortable and scared. Just a thought. And then she opened the door. The detention block door hissed open, and Kyle Thoss held his breath. 6 Valraxian cubs materialized in the corridor, and they were not attacking. Emma Johnson stood, perfectly still in the doorway, hands visible and empty, doing absolutely nothing threatening. The cubs, huddled in a confused mass near the far corner of the detention chamber, lifted their heads. They should have lunged. Every tactical assessment in Kyle Thoss's files predicted immediate violence. Pack predators under stress, cornered with a potential threat in their enclosed space. Instead, they whimpered. Yeah, okay, Emma said softly, kneeling down slowly. Pack animals scared out of their minds. I know how to handle this. Vexthul's voice crackled over comms, high and strained. Motion sensors confirm 6 entities. Cubs are not in attack formation. They are clustering around the human. Kyle Thoss watched the monitors, unable to look away. Emma wasn't advancing. She was simply sitting, letting her body language say what her words didn't need to. I'm not a threat. One of the cubs, the largest, probably the alpha of the smaller pack, ventured closer. 3 meters, 2 meters, close enough to kill her in a single bound. Emma didn't move. The cub approached her hand, sniffed it, and then, in a gesture that seemed to contradict everything Kyle Thoss understood about predator behavior, pressed its head against her palm. Oh, buddy, Emma whispered, and started scratching behind the cub's ears. Yeah, I know. You're scared. It's okay. You're okay. The other 5 cubs began approaching. Not stalking, not hunting. They moved like children seeking comfort, pressing against Emma's body, climbing into her lap, making soft vocalizations that Kyle Thoss's threat assessment system had classified as pre-kill hunting calls. He was starting to suspect his threat assessment system was fundamentally broken. "Johnson, status report," he commanded, because command and control was something he could still exercise, even as the universe rewrote itself in front of him. "Status. Cubs are terrified, trying to figure out if I'm going to hurt them," Emma reported, her voice steady and matter-of-fact, as she sat there surrounded by 6 level 9 predators. "They're also cold, really cold, like shivering, and they're hungry. I can feel their ribs. And they're... hold on." She paused, doing something with her hand, then continued. "Yeah, they're absolutely stressed out of their minds. Someone's been feeding them on some kind of mechanical schedule without any social component, holding them in a too cold environment, and they've got no enrichment. So they did what terrified animals do. They panicked." "Johnson, that's speculation. You need to..." "It's not speculation. It's basic behavioral biology." Emma was still sitting with 6 deadly predators surrounding her, but her tone had shifted from gentle to slightly irritated. "Your protocols treat them like weapons. They're not weapons. They're kids who are terrified. Kids who escaped because the situation they were in was wrong, not because they suddenly became violent." Zara's voice came through the comms, quiet and thoughtful. "She's right. We don't know that," Kyle Thas said, but he was already pulling up the detention chamber's environmental logs. He found the data within seconds. Temperature holding at 8 degrees Celsius. Valraxian prime environment required 22 degrees minimum for juveniles. 8 degrees. "The temperature readings," Vexthul started, "are completely wrong," Emma finished, "which is why the cubs escaped. Cold makes predators act unpredictably. Stressed juveniles in a cold box start looking for ways out. It's not malice. It's survival instinct." Kyle Thas felt something fundamental shift in his understanding. Not break, not yet. Just shift. "What do you recommend?" he asked quietly. "Move them somewhere warm," Emma said, like it was obvious. "Somewhere with space, with enrichment materials. Somewhere they can actually be what they're supposed to be instead of what your detention protocols turn them into. The agricultural sector. It's warm, open, got plenty of space and resources they can engage with. We move them there, they calm down, and everyone stops having a catastrophic day. That violates containment protocol," Vexthul said reflexively. "Your containment protocol is why they escaped," Emma replied, not unkindly. "So I'm going to ask, do we want to keep doing the thing that isn't working, or do we want to try something new?" Silence in the command center. "I'm moving them," Emma said. "Stand down your security teams, or these cubs get panicked again, and then you're back to having a crisis. Your choice." Kael'thas watched the monitors as Emma slowly stood, the 6 cubs following her like she was their gravity well. Like she was their safety. Like she was Pac. "Stand down all security personnel in corridors Delta through 7. He ordered, hearing his own voice as if from a great distance. "Prepare the agricultural sector for immediate occupancy. Temperature to 24 degrees minimum. And get me every care protocol we have on file for Valraxian youth." "Sir?" Vexthul's voice trembled. "What are we doing?" "Something new," Kael'thas said, watching Emma walk through his station with 6 deadly predators following her like ducklings. "We're trying something new." The cubs followed her, not because they were controlled, not because they were compelled. They followed because Emma Johnson somehow had convinced them that following was safe. They followed because she understood something Kael'thas had completely missed. On the monitors, Zara smiled. The agricultural sector transformed within an hour. Emma had directed the reconfiguration with the casual authority of someone who'd done this before, which she probably had, somewhere on Earth with whatever equivalent predators humans kept. Temperature raised to 24 degrees. Enrichment materials scattered across the open space, climbing structures, puzzle feeders, varied textures, things to engage juvenile minds. Natural light simulation cycling through appropriate Valraxian prime diurnal patterns. And then the cubs showed everyone what they actually were. They played, tumbled over each other, wrestled with coordination and strategy. One of them figured out how to operate a puzzle feeder and called the others over, teaching them the mechanism. They weren't weapons. They were kids. Intelligent, curious, social kids who'd been locked in an 8-degree box and told to be grateful. Kyle Thas watched from the observation window with Dr. Sinara, the station's lead xenobiologist, and tried to reconcile what he was seeing with 20 years of security protocols. This is... Sinara trailed off, her chromatophores flickering with distress. Sir, I've studied Valraxian behavior for 12 years, published 17 peer-reviewed papers on juvenile aggression patterns, and I missed this completely. You had limited data, Kael'thas said, which was a kind way of saying you worked with my broken protocols and never questioned them. We had wrong data, Sinara corrected, still staring at the cubs. One was now napping in a patch of simulated sunlight, while another groomed its fur. Look at them. Peaceful, content, social. Everything we classified as aggressive predatory behavior was a stress response to an unsuitable environment. Emma appeared beside them, holding a nutrition report she'd apparently demanded from maintenance. She studied it with the expression of someone reading a particularly bad restaurant menu. Yeah, so here's another thing, she said without preamble. Your feeding schedule is nutrient efficient, but texture monotonous. Predators need variety. Pack animals need to hunt together, even if hunting is just figuring out how to get food from a puzzle feeder. You've been feeding them like they're machines. They're not machines. How do you know all this? Sinara asked. There was genuine confusion in her voice. Confusion mixed with something that might have been professional embarrassment. I worked at an animal sanctuary for 3 years before I joined security, Emma said matter-of-factly. We had predators from Earth, tigers, jaguars, that kind of thing. Similar problems. Stressed animals in captivity don't respond well to industrial efficiency. They need enrichment, mental stimulation, social structure. It's not complicated, it's just different from how you've been treating them. Kael'thas felt something inside him begin to fracture. Not painfully, just breaking, like a shell cracking open. I need to review our incident files, he said quietly. 3 hours later, he wished he hadn't. The command center had gone silent. Every security incident involving Valraxian cubs in the past decade was now being reanalyzed through Emma's framework, and the pattern was unmistakable. Incident 47. Cub escapes containment, attacks maintenance crew. Reframed, environmental malfunction caused temperature drop. Scared juvenile fled and defended itself when cornered. Incident 23. Multiple cubs, coordinate aggression against security team. Reframed. Pack animals responding to threat display with defensive pack behavior. Perfectly normal, completely predictable if you understood pack dynamics. Incident 8. Sustained assault on detention block. Reframed. Psychological breakdown from isolation. The cubs were trying to escape a traumatic situation. Emma sat across from Kael'thas in the command center, drinking what had to be her 4th cup of terrible station coffee, while Vexthul compiled the data summary. Zara stood silently in the corner, watching everything. How many? Kyle Thas asked. He didn't specify. Emma knew what he meant. 17 documented incidents, Emma said. Probably more that weren't recorded as incidents because no one got killed. How many times did your security teams panic over normal behavior and create the crisis by responding? Most of them, Kyle Thas admitted. His voice felt hollow. Most of them are panic responses to normal pack behavior. Yeah. Emma wasn't being kind about it, but she wasn't being cruel either. She was just being accurate. Look, I'm not saying you needed a xenobiology degree. You needed to treat them like beings instead of things. That's like basic. Sentient life needs appropriate conditions. Appropriate conditions include environment, food, social structure, mental engagement, all of that. Not just the bare minimum for survival. I've been doing this for 20 years, Kyle Thas said quietly. Yeah, and you've probably been doing it wrong for 19 of them, Emma replied. But you're stopping now, so that's the important part. Zara made a soft humming sound from her corner. Almost a laugh. The human has good perspective. Kyle Thas pulled up his personal log. Every decision, every protocol he'd approved, every security incident he'd signed off on. And underneath it all, a terrible understanding. He'd been fighting enemies that didn't exist. He'd been traumatizing intelligent beings because he'd never thought to ask basic questions. What happens now? Vexthul asked hesitantly. Do we keep them here? We contact Valrax Prime, Emma said. We tell them their cubs were held in improper conditions and we're transferring them to appropriate care. And then you probably don't ever get Valraxian juveniles again because you've demonstrated you don't know how to maintain them. Kyle Thas should have felt defensive, should have argued. Instead, he felt something that might have been relief. Emma's right, he said. We need to contact the council. We need to revise every containment protocol. We need to bring in appropriate specialists to review what we've been doing. He looked at her. Thank you for not letting us make this worse. Emma shrugged, finishing her coffee. Just did my job. Your job is figuring out why your job was broken in the first place. In the agricultural sector, the Valraxian cubs played in the warm light, completely unaware that they'd just fundamentally restructured how an entire station understood the nature of intelligence, safety, and responsibility. Zara watched from the observation window and smiled. Emma was scrolling through the station's incident database when she started laughing. Not the polite kind of laugh, the real kind. The kind that made Kyle Thas look up from his coffee, which he'd started drinking in the command center because his entire command structure had started drinking coffee like it was oxygen, and ask what was funny. Your incident logs, Emma said, still scrolling. I'm looking at the last 3 years. Every single time something went wrong that your protocols couldn't handle, a human solved it. Every single one. She pulled up the first file. Hydroponic system failure. Your maintenance algorithms couldn't diagnose it. Happened to find a human engineer who looked at it for 5 minutes and said, your sensor's reading backwards. Fixed. Another file. Waste processing malfunction. Your technicians followed the manual step by step, made it worse. Human custodian just rerouted the system manually and bought time until you could get a specialist, kept the whole sector from flooding. And another. Communication array went down. Your IT team said it needed full replacement. Human communications officer, no actual tech training, played around with it for an hour and reset a weird cascade protocol nobody knew existed. Working fine. They were doing their jobs. Sinara offered weakly. Yeah, no, Emma said. They were doing their jobs differently. Your protocols say A, B, C in sequence. Humans look at a problem and go, what if we do D instead? Or skip to Z? Or do a combination nobody predicted? And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But they're not afraid of trying things that don't match the manual. She closed the database and looked at Kael'thas directly. You didn't hire humans because we're smart. You hired us because we're weirdly good at impossible situations. We're kind of problem-solving animals. Comes with having survived everything trying to kill us for millennia. Kael'thas felt the fracture inside him expand into something larger. He opened the human history files. Domestication of predators, civilization surviving asteroid impacts, ice ages, plagues that killed billions, wars, diseases, ecosystems collapsing, and humans rebuilding them. Not because humans were naturally gifted. Because humans adapted. They looked at impossible situations and didn't accept that they were impossible. They read situations. They empathized with problems instead of just treating them as technical failures. They found solutions that violated protocol because protocol wasn't relevant to the actual problem. They're not problem solvers, Zara said quietly from the observation window. She'd been there the entire time, watching everything, and now she was speaking with the certainty of someone who'd known this all along. They're survivors. Entire species came into being trying to eliminate them. And they're still here. Still problem-solving. Still trying. Emma and Kael'thas sat in the break room, drinking the terrible station coffee that had somehow become the focal point of human-alien communication on Kepler-7. She was explaining something that should have been obvious, but somehow wasn't. Here's the thing, Emma said. We're not smarter than you. I want to be clear on that. Sinara's probably got more raw analytical capacity than I'll ever have. But we're good at impossible situations because we don't assume the rules are immutable. We'll try something ridiculous if nothing else works. And we fundamentally believe that problems can be solved if you're willing to be creative. She took a sip of coffee and made a face. This is genuinely terrible coffee, by the way. But we keep drinking it because nobody's bothered to figure out why it's terrible. Someone should fix that. Back on Earth, she continued, we call this approach Thursday. Problems? Yeah, that's just Tuesday through Sunday. You get used to it. You get good at it. You stop assuming that the system as designed is the system as it has to be. Within the hour, the Trade Station Council was in emergency session. How many human security personnel were stationed across Kepler-7? 17. How many incidents had been handled by humans differently than standard protocols? Most of them. What happened if humans became the standard for problem-solving instead of the exception? Zara's voice came through clearly. Everything changes. Because the implication was unavoidable. Humans weren't better. They were just different. They approached problems without the constraint that problems had to be solved within established parameters. They could see situations that didn't fit the categories the protocols anticipated. And that made them fundamentally, irreplaceably valuable. Kael'thas sat alone in the command center after the council session ended, looking at the agricultural sector where 6 Valraxian cubs played peacefully because a human security guard had asked the right question. The question wasn't, how do we contain them? The question was, what do they actually need? And that question had changed everything. 48 hours later, Emma Johnson was napping in the break room. This was notable because exactly 48 hours earlier, she'd been navigating a diplomatic crisis involving 6 apex predators and an institution that had fundamentally misunderstood its own responsibility. Now she was just asleep in a chair, head tilted back completely unbothered by the weight of paradigm shifts and administrative upheaval. The cubs were going to be fine. That was decided. Transfer authorization had come through from Valrax Prime with surprising speed. Apparently, when you contacted the parent world and said, "Your juveniles were being traumatized, but we're fixing it," they moved fast. Emma had worked with Sinara to design a proper facility, warm, enriched, socially appropriate, everything the detention block had failed to be. The cubs were thriving already, just knowing that environment was changing. The door to the break room hissed open. 6 Valraxian cubs poured through like liquid intelligence. And somehow, nobody was entirely sure how, they'd figured out that Emma was in here. Maybe they smelled her. Maybe they just knew. Pack animals were good at knowing where their alpha was. They didn't attack the sleeping human. They investigated her the way cubs investigate things, with curiosity and social bonding. One climbed gently into her lap. Another pressed against her shoulder. The rest arranged themselves around her chair like she was the center of a wheel. And they were the spokes. Security arrived 30 seconds later, ready for crisis. They stopped in the doorway. It was genuinely the most wholesome thing anyone on the station had witnessed. 6 Level 9 predators, classified as apex threats, arranged peacefully around a sleeping human like she was their pack mother, like she was safety, like she was home. Kailthas, watching on the monitors from the command center, felt something in his chest settle. His mandibles curved upward. He was smiling. Actually smiling. He hadn't done that in longer than he could calculate. Emma opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by predators. "Well," she said, voice rough with sleep, "this is either the best thing or about to be very bad. And honestly, I'm too tired to figure out which." The cubs didn't move. They were content. She was safe. That was enough. She scratched the nearest one behind the ears, and it made a soft rumbling sound that she was pretty sure was the equivalent of purring. Yeah. Group nap time. I get it. We're packed now. That's very touching, cubs. Also, your breath smells like the nutrient paste, which is not as wholesome." Zara appeared in the doorway and actually laughed. Real laughter. "Humans," she said, like it explained everything. New protocols were established within the hour. Every dangerous creature containment facility was flagged for review. Humans and xenobiologists would work together on protocols, not humans overriding established procedures, but working collaboratively to challenge assumptions. 17 human security and support personnel were formally assigned to problem-solving positions across Kepler-7. Not as specialists, as collaborators, as the people who asked the questions protocols didn't know how to answer. Kailthas stood in his office with Emma, and for a Valraxian, his posture conveyed something approaching humility. "You taught us something we needed to learn," he said carefully. "The protocols exist to serve beings, not the other way around." Emma nodded, accepting the thanks without fanfare. Protocols are tools. Tools are useful until they're not. Then you get new tools. She was already looking past this moment, toward the next thing. 24 hours. Later, Emma Johnson's official title changed to Behavioral Specialist for Problem Resolution. Her first case involved 3 cranky Zenithians who were refusing to leave the agricultural sector and a malfunctioning energy core that was causing minor power fluctuations across the South Wing. By all technical measures, it was a system malfunction. By protocol, it required emergency engineering team intervention. Emma spent 40 minutes just asking questions. "Okay, so who can explain what's actually wrong here instead of what you think is supposed to be wrong?" she asked the assembled experts. Because from where I'm standing, the Zenithians like the agricultural sector because it's warm and has good light. And the energy core is fluctuating because something about the environmental systems is drawing more power than expected. So maybe the problem isn't the core. Maybe the problem is that everyone's ignoring why the core's working harder. 20 minutes later, the issue was solved. The environmental controls in the agricultural sector had been set slightly too high. Nobody had noticed because nobody asked why. Emma asked why. Zara, now officially her colleague, just shook her head, smiling. You make everything look so simple, Emma. Nah, Emma replied, heading toward her next appointment with her coffee in hand. I just don't assume things are complicated until they actually are. She walked through the station corridors with the casual competence of someone who just fundamentally reshaped institutional thinking and moved on to her afternoon schedule without remarking on it. Nodding to security guards, checking in on the cubs through observation windows. They were thriving, playing, being the intelligent young animals they'd always been. Heading toward her next impossible situation, carrying terrible station coffee and genuine optimism about problem solving. Fundamentally unchanged by having reshaped an entire station's understanding of how to approach the universe. In the background, the Valraxian cubs played in their new environment, happy and healthy and free from the weight of misunderstanding. Kyle Toss watched from an observation window, and he finally understood. Humans weren't an anomaly interrupting the natural order of protocol. They were the reminder of what he'd forgotten, that systems existed to serve beings, that intelligence required flexibility, that sometimes the most complex problems had simple solutions if you were willing to ask different questions, and that the future of every station, every species, every protocol was going to be fundamentally different now. Because humans had arrived, and they were good at impossible things.